I was found guilty and fined $10,000 plus court costs, so $12,500 for attending Easter service mass. We are appealing that. We put in an application for the appeal to be heard without paying the fine. The judge came back and said, no, I want all of it paid before our appeal, so it has to be paid in full by June 20th.
Welcome to the show, everybody. And I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine, Kristen Nagle. And I first heard about Kristen shortly after the infamous January 6th event in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. And I think I saw the interview that she did with Rebel Media. And as a result of being in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, she returned back to London, Ontario, where she was fired from her job as a nurse. And when I first actually got to the Convoy and I heard Kristen was in town, I just had to meet her because I knew who she was. I was following her and I was actually a big fan. So it was really exciting that I had a chance to meet Kristen in Ottawa. And I'm happy to say that ever since then, Kristen and I have become very good friends. Mm-hmm. And so with that, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming and talking to us. I know you've got your brand new fresh baby sitting on your lap right now. So welcome to the show and thanks for spending time with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and be on this journey with you. That's for sure.
Oh, and it's been a journey. It's been a journey. So, as I recall from what happened to you during January 6th, you actually didn't even know what was going on the other side of town. And it was, I think from what I remember seeing, it was your husband that called you from your hotel room and asked you if you were okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where he informed you that there was this big event happening on the other side of town, at the Capitol buildings. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if I got that right.
Yeah, close. We were at the Supreme Court, so the steps there on a health and freedom stage. So we were actually walking distance to the Capitol. So we did see, like big crowds of people and everything going on, but it was very peaceful and fun, loving at that time. We spoke on this stage with like Del Bigtree and Nikki Willis. There was Kevin Jenkins. It was pretty amazing. We were early. We spoke at 10 a.m. and we kind of were wrapping up and getting ready to wait for our taxi to take us back to the hotel room. And there was lots of sirens and lots of actions and people kind of coming, walking away from the building. And yeah, we had no idea what was going on. And that's when my husband called and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." I was like, "There's lots of sirens and things going on. We're just waiting to get back to the hotel room." I was like, "Why? What's happening?" And then, yeah, he informed me what's going on. Sarah and I felt pretty silly being, not interested in politics at all. Obviously, over the last 3 years, you've had to get to be a little bit more familiar, but we were so naive and had no idea really what January 6th was all about. And yeah, we found out very quickly firsthand.
So is that when frontline nurses actually began, or did Canadian frontline nurses happen prior to that?
No, it was at that time in Washington. So we went as global frontline nurses. That was put together by Nurse Erin, who was the whistleblower, the expose of Elmhurst Hospital in New York. She did the undercover nurse. So she put this together, global frontline nurses, with Sarah and I, Nicole Saratek, who's now founder of American Frontline Nurses, and 3 other nurses from across the state. So we wanted to have partnering like sister organizations underneath global frontline nurses, and Canada was going to be the first. And we wanted to open up different places in, we were getting messages from Sweden, Australia, and things like that. But unfortunately, global frontline nurses dissolved, but Canadian frontline nurses was formed, and we kept pushing forward, Sarah and I, ever since then. Ever since we became domestic terrorists, and yeah, the RCMP showed up at our door wanting to know our involvement in the storming and rioting of the Capitol. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe if there's time, we'll get into that a little bit more. I've had my own experiences with this kind of let's just say tactic.
Yes.
But before we get into that, I want to back up a little bit, and I want to talk about you personally. Like, where did you grow up?
hmm I grew up in Oakville, which is funny because I never like saying that because as soon as people hear Oakville, they think of, I don't know, hoity-toity. That's what I picture Oakville as, especially now. But very middle-class family, firefighter, flight attendant, mother. I thought we were pretty normal. Most of the time, I thought our family was pretty boring because we actually all got along and didn't have any domestic disputes of failed marriages or things going on that my friends were talking about. We had a really good upbringing with my parents and each other. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's nice to hear because I don't often hear that kind of a great narrative
Fast
of
forward till
a
now,
childhood
it's a
growing up.
very different story of dysfunctional and everything else happening. But growing up, it seemed to be
Yeah,
quite normal. Hmm
yeah. So you've got this childhood, and at some point in your life, you decide you want to be a nurse.
hmm
Is that something you as a childhood dream, or was it later on in life? But at some point, why did you choose to become a nurse?
So that's a pretty interesting story, which I think is the reason why I went into nursing and why I've been in the position that I am in. I was a very active kid. I loved being outdoors. I loved nature, hiking, exploring. My mom was said once, like, you're never happy. Like, why are you never happy? And it's like, it's not that I'm not happy. I just, I always wanted to see more. I just thought there was more to life than what we were told. This, go to school, get a job, more school, get a job, wait till you retire to live. And that was just, it never sat well with me. I was like, there's just more. We're supposed to be experiencing life more, and doing things and seeing the world. So I was always kind of, trying to get all the experiences. So nursing, I actually wanted to go into environmental sciences. I read this book called Alaska, and it was like these group of university kids out canoeing on the waters, doing water samples, hiking in the mountains of Alaska, and it sounded amazing. So I wanted to go into environmental sciences to do things like that. And I was told that there's no money in that, there's no jobs available, and that is a bad career path to go down. So I was kind of guided into nursing. It's a steady job, really good pay. I get to travel with it, and I can help people and make a difference. And so all that was very appealing to me. And I was like, okay, that sounds good. Let's go into nursing. I found one of my old nursing journals a couple of years ago, and or one of my journals in first year nursing. It was like the first year in my dorm. Did I make the biggest mistake of my life? So, but
It's funny you described that, and I almost think that you could have considered joining the Canadian military
I
as a
did
nurse.
actually. Yes, but I'm
Well, I
not
have to
big
say
on.
I'm glad you didn't,
I
but
know I'm not
yes.
big on commitments, and I think it was like a 3 or 5 year commitment. I'm like, I'm not ready to make that kind of commitment. I don't know where I'm going to want to be in that time. But I did look into all the options with that, but yeah, obviously didn't follow through.
So where did you end up going to school?
I went to school at University of Western Ontario, which is now, I guess, Western, here in London, which is how I ended up ending up here. I guess it was familiar routes, but I did travel with nursing. I did what I thought I would. I worked in Whitehorse for a bit. Right after nursing school, I worked in Tucson, Arizona. Worked and lived in Australia for a bit. So nursing has definitely given me a lot of skills. It has allowed me to have a secure job, travel all these places, meet amazing people. And I think, it has been a blessing, and I think there's a purpose. I was there so I could end up where I am now. Mhm.
Well, I'm going to ask this question. Um, would you have chosen that as a career path again, knowing what you know now?
No, no, no. And then
Sorry, I had to ask.
yeah, no. And then when I get a lot of messages from parents or students, my child is, X whatever year of nursing and doesn't know what to do, or my, child wants to go into nursing. What do you say? And it's like, well, like, what are their beliefs and values, and how convicted are they? Because they'll get eaten up. It is a very toxic environment, and the young can get eaten up alive, and it can kill your soul if you're not aligned with what's happening. And we've seen, how corrupt it is. And I asked them, do you want to like help people? Do you want to see people get better and heal? I was like, because this is actually not the avenue for that. There's other ways. But if your heart is set on nursing, for sure, but just know what you're kind of getting into.
So what do you think are the other ways?
So when my first son was born, something came over me. I think it was just kind of divine intervention and maybe people that were placed in my life. I became very interested in food, what I was going to feed him as a baby. I thought I knew all these things. But it turns out, like everything else, it was another big lie. Pediatricians do not know anything about what to feed our children and should not be guided in doing so. So I became really passionate about food for our babies. So I went back to school to become a holistic nutritionist. And that's when all the light bulb moments went on. Because I was like, oh my gosh, like being healthy is so easy. Like healing is so easy. It doesn't mean that it's an easy process, but the steps are simple. It can be a long, hard journey, but the steps are simple. And I was like, why don't we know about this? Why aren't we taught this in nursing school? Why don't we do these things? And then that's when I quickly realized that it's because they don't want us to heal. They don't want us to know these things. They don't want us to be sovereign and responsible over our bodies. They want us to be stuck in this sick care system. So the other ways are becoming your own expert over your health and your body. Are looking. It's simple. Like eating food that's touched by the sun. Does God recognize it as food? Making sure that you're surrounded by people that love you and support you, getting outside in nature, connecting with yourself. But faith is a huge aspect that is not talked about as well in the medical system. You're flesh and bones, but we know that we are energetic beings created by, a creator. Like I believe that we are divine beings, and that part is not recognized in healthcare.
Well, it reminds me of a story about you and I actually in the summertime when we were both marching with James Topp. And I think I recall on that day, you marched 42 kilometers with him on that day. I think I only did somewhere around like 13 or 14 kilometers and then I tapped out for whatever reason. But no, I remember you did the full day. And at the end of the day, I'm reaching for the Advil. And I think you left my vehicle because we were in my car eating my lunch. You left my vehicle, you went into the woods and you were hunting for, natural pharmaceuticals in the forest. I'm like, where did she go? Like, and there was bugs everywhere and you were in there foraging for nature's medicine. And, it seemed to work for you, but me at the moment, I'm like, I'm pretty satisfied with my Advil. But for you, it's, that's a way of life, I think, that you've chosen to go down. Mm-hmm. So I want to ask this question because this question is really a hybrid, I think, of what you're talking about and where the medical community is. And this maybe is something that bridges the two philosophies in a sense that, there's a spiritual component to this. And I want to actually ask you about the Florence Nightingale Pledge. And I took this off your website. And I note that it was specifically on your website. And I guess what I want to do is know, why is this on your website, the Florence Nightingale Pledge? And I recently heard about this from other nurses. And so why is this pledge important to you?
I think it just says it so beautifully. I think you have it written down there because I actually wish I memorized it and know it by heart, but I don't. But I think it would be good if you read it first and then I could answer it.
Sure. To pass our lives in purity and practice our profession faithfully, agreeing to never take or administer any harmful drug, by committing to evaluate the standard of our profession, we must recognize that we are the first and last line of defense in our society for decency, integrity, and compassion. We have the first and last opportunity to do the honorable and dignified thing for people. Mm-hmm. And to me, I think that's really powerful. I mean,
I know I just got like full body chills again, just hearing those words and where we are now. Yeah.
But From my perspective, because I have um, many, many days and weeks and months in hospitals with one of my children.
Mm-hmm.
And, I read that really resonated with me because I can tell you from my experience with nurses, especially at a children's hospital, there is a bond that, from my perspective, develops between a parent and the nurse that is looking after your sick child. And I would imagine to a certain extent that bond does build over time in, adults that are in hospital care for long periods of time. But I think, people have this perception, I hope, that you go into certain professions with a very virtuous lens, that you are going to go into that profession because you truly want to help people. And I know in some cases that's not the case. I mean, the pay, the benefits, the hours, the vacation time. I mean, I know those things are very attractive to certain trades, but I would imagine that the medical community, by and large, would attract people with a very virtuous cause or justification or reason, or even more importantly, a calling to go into that profession to help people. And I can tell you, at Sick Kids, where I spent a lot of time with nurses and doctors, those nurses, let's say, 1 in 20 that don't belong. It's literally like they're walking around with a big neon sign above their head saying, I don't belong here. You get those nurses that just, they don't belong. They stick out like a sore thumb. But I can tell you that for the vast majority of the nurses that deal with children or at Sick Kids Hospital, they're wonderful people. They're people that I will never forget for the rest of my life, and how they treated us as parents and how they treated my child. And so, my concern, like you said at the beginning, was about new people coming into the system. When you first started nursing versus where nursing is now, what do you think is the difference? Is there a difference with new nurses coming into the system now, just like I would say prior to COVID, versus nurses from the past? Is there a difference in justification? Is there a difference in reason why people go into nursing?
I think, yeah, I was getting kind of almost like teary thinking about everything you're describing, because I worked with, I started off in pediatrics was my training, and I spent the majority of my career, so 12 years, I was a nurse for 14 years, and 12 of that was spent in the neonatal intensive care unit. So working with babies, from the most vulnerable, like 23 weeks and beyond. You're with families for over 100 days, and you become like their primary nurse, where every shift, that is who you're looking after. So you do bond with the parents. I've been in touch with, several, and it's, that is what I miss the most, because that was what nursing was the relationships, the caring, the being there, the supporting them through all the hard times, but also the exciting times, because everyone used to say to me, like, NICU must be so hard. And I was like, it can be, but it's also so rewarding when you get to see those first moments, the first time they get to, hold their baby skin to skin, or the first time, they feed them, even if it's through a syringe, like a feeding tube, or, the baby looks at them. Like, just all these little moments that we can take for granted are just monumental, for these families, and to be able to share in those moments is priceless. So that is what I miss about nursing is the relationships, the teaching, the support, and being there. And that's what nursing is supposed to be. And that's why that Florence Nightingale pledge is so important, because, she was kind of, she paved the way into nursing and what nursing should be. And I think a lot of us going into nursing, that's how we envisioned it. You are there to support the patients, to actually, put hands on them, to heal them, emotionally, physically, mentally. You're there. And I noticed a huge shift even when I went into nursing. It all became you needed a degree from university to go into nursing when I went in. The older nurses needed a diploma from a college, and they were so skilled and so smart, and and just so in tune to the patients and caring. It was amazing. Whereas through the university, they just just cram down theory. That's all great, depending on what you need it for, but you need that hands-on connection and the caring. And I can say over the years, that part is being lost. It's just skills and orders and tasks. You just become this robot. And I can tell this now too, because they're even teaching at four universities, colleges about me, using my name about what not to do, kind of thing, in ethics courses and classes. York University has a whole class on Kristen Nagle. This is what she did, and just trying to really scare those nurses into standing in line.
All provincial and territorial regulatory bodies have statements relating specifically to accountability. And what is one of our biggest stories in the news right now with the nurse? She was a London Health Science nurse who went to the Trump rally and was filmed and was charged and lost her job and is likely going to lose her registration. We need to be accountable for our own actions. And apparently storming the U.S. Capitol was not a good idea.
Have you lost your license?
I have not. I have not lost my license. They came after my license and under three investigations. They actually gave both Crystal and I a caution. So what that means is they said, okay, we're not going to take you down the disciplinary route. We're not going to try to take your license away. But in order for you to stay active in your license, you need to do this remedial education course, paid for out of pocket, which was $3,000. And you have to stand in front of the ICRC committee, which is the disciplinary committee, and get your spanking and get lectured and told all the things you did wrong. That obviously was not going to happen. I lost the ability to fight that in the court system for whatever reason. Crystal went ahead to fight that in the courts through judicial review, whatever it was. And this is, again, another way how corrupt our court systems are, which we know on so many different levels. But I mean, the regulatory bodies are a whole next level. But she lost with judicial notice. So it was a case about evidence. So they,
Right.
said, your evidence, what you said is wrong. And she's like, okay, well, how about you look at my evidence? Here it is. Here are the sources. Let's look at it and see if it actually is wrong. And this is what she was, going into courts with them about, because she got the same caution as I did. She's like, I'm not doing what you said. So how about you look at my evidence first? And they're like, no, we don't need to. Judicial notice. We can take it as is. We don't need to look at your sources or your evidence or even see if you're right. And so she lost. And then the college charged her $17,500 for court costs and whatever else. And she's stuck in the same position as I am. I didn't have that opportunity to even go to the courts. And it was either do what they say or your license will be suspended. And I resigned my license. I didn't want to be in that profession anymore. I was never going to go back to be a conventional nurse. I didn't want to keep giving them money for them to keep coming back after us. And to me, it was more of a statement for me to walk away from them and just be like, this is not even what you're not worth my time right now, wasting my time and energy on fighting for something I don't want when I can move ahead and be better than what you're creating.
Yeah. And for people watching this, just want to take a moment and talk a little bit about judicial notice, because it's something I've spoken about publicly. In fact, I've even done a video on judicial notice. And it's really this process within the court systems that I learned about this year, where judges or the courts are not actually looking at evidence. They're accepting the justification at face value from certain people that they deem to be in more of an expert position than they are. So to use a very, very crude example, Statue of Liberty, for example, it's commonly known that it is in New York City. Okay, so judicial notice would be something where like, no, I don't need to see the evidence of judicial notice or the evidence that New York has the Statue of Liberty, right? That's an example. There's no evidence that's required. But what we saw was that a lot of the times the courts were accepting judicial notice without actually, for example, knowing where the Statue of Liberty is, but only by virtue of somebody saying, hey, it's in New York City, take my word for it. And that's been a fundamentally flawed situation that we've all been in. And I know Professor Bruce Pardy, who teaches law at Queen's University, has talked about judicial notice. He spoke about it at the NCI. I spoke about it on a video that I had done, and I referenced a specific case. This is where the courts have deferred an opinion or deferred looking at the evidence when it was brought forth by public health. They just said, you're the experts, we'll take your word for it, and we won't look at any of your evidence, which is something that happened out in BC with Bonnie Henry and the lawsuits going on with her. And that's been happening around the country. So judicial notice is something that I would encourage the viewers to pay particular attention to when they hear that term, because it's a way that the courts and the government have been getting around up to this point, being culpable for the things that they've done. And so what we're seeing is judges, I can't confirm this, but I think the judges may now be starting to look beyond judicial notice and saying, okay, I think it's now time that we actually do look at evidence. But I wanted to make that clear for the viewers, because it's a really, really important thing in our justice system where evidence is literally being consciously ignored by judges or courts. And that advantage has been exploited by prosecutors. So I wanted to highlight that point because it's really, really quite important. Mm-hmm. But, you had raised other issues, and I know Jordan Peterson has talked about this. And I want to ask you about this in terms of nursing, but he made a statement about doctors. The selection of doctors into medical school there's a certain portion of your application, whether the reviewing board or the acceptance board to the medical school views that potential doctor applicant as a person who's compliant. So do you have any thoughts on maybe how that is being applied in the universities or the colleges towards nurses or potential students who want to become nurses? Do you think that they're being viewed as or assessed on their compliance to authority as well?
Absolutely. Maybe not directly, but definitely indirectly they're making that point. I mean, as I had said, they're using me as an example. I think there was a St. Clair College. I have a video clip of it. Some students sent it to me, and it was like, pay attention to, following, the rules or following authorities. Like, look what this nurse did. She did this and, got herself fired. They're talking about Washington, DC. So I think not so direct as what was stated with the doctors, but definitely indirectly, they're telling nurses to, stay in line and follow the rules. I remember actually when I went to Tucson, Arizona to work, I was right out of nursing school and I was going to join this OR program. And it was supposed to be 2 years long. And anyways, one of the mentors, the nurses there training me, she made this example of, okay, she's like, if the anesthesiologist needs anything, like if they need, a blanket or, a drink, then you're going to run out and get it for them. And I remember in that moment thinking, I was like, no, I am not. I'm not here to be like their guinea pig of getting them a blanket and a drink. If they need actual, clinical help and skills, like that is what I went to school for 4 years, not to get these, higher ups, however you want us to view them, they're blankets if they're cold. Like, give me a break. That's not what I'm here for. So yeah, there's definitely the grooming, I guess you could say, into being, complacent and knowing your status of where you belong. Mm-hmm.
So, I want to talk about the doctors a little bit, and sort of a similar question about the doctors or the nurses. Would you say that there's a change in the the quality of the young doctors that were coming into the system versus perhaps when you first started, or some of the doctors that maybe trained you when you were in university? Would you say that there's a difference in the level of capability, or the way the new doctors practice, or even do you find the doctors are much more compliant to authority?
Um, I think that that's just been their education and the indoctrination of what they've learned to be true. So that is just, again, what they know. They're being trained by pharmaceutical reps. Like, that's all their books. They're just trained in disease and what drug to prescribe. Like, that's what it comes down to. So they're practicing within their scope of knowledge of what they're being taught. I have to say, with the area that I worked in, being an ICU, I did very much feel like it was team collaboration. Like, the nurses were very much respected by the doctors. The doctors wanted to hear from the nurses, and they listened to us. So I think I was very fortunate to work in that environment specifically, where we did kind of work as a team, and it never really felt like this like hierarchy of care, which I did feel in other places. Specifically, Australia was still really set up that way. But what I did notice from the doctors is they're coming from all over, like, foreign countries. They're not, majority of them are not from Canada, is what I did notice. Mm-hmm.
Right. And did you find there was a significant difference in the capability of the doctors? And if so, where would the differences really be?
Some of them were like very skilled and very knowledgeable, different. Honestly, some of it was just cultural and language barriers. It was what I experienced in my unit, but my unit is very much like a bubble of what is out there in the rest of nursing. So I'm probably maybe not the best person to ask. Yeah.
Well, I certainly experienced something similar at Sick Kids in Toronto as well. And from my perspective as the parent, I didn't perceive a level of difference. I felt fairly confident that the doctors had supervisors and had oversight. So that wasn't really a concern for me, but we do train international doctors. And I know the doctors that were at Sick Kids believe that, they do 2 years an internship or a fellowship at Sick Kids, and they could go back to their home countries and basically write their own ticket. And so it was, my perspective that they were here to further their careers back in their home country. And, I don't really have an opinion about that one way or another. When you're dealing with children, I think children deserve the best care that medicine can provide, not money. But, it's really about the children at that point, and I don't care what country you're from. Mm-hmm. But to sort of further that, before the world turned on its head, how would you say you were supported by your supervisor when it came to advocating for patients? So, for example, you got into a conflict with another medical professional, or you didn't feel that the treatment for the child was appropriate. You spoke up to your supervisor. Before what started 3 years ago, did you feel that you were supported in terms of advocating for your patients?
Yeah, I think we all did. The nurses spend, like, as you know, significant time at the bedside. Like, we are at that, baby's bed for 12-hour shifts, like, at a time. We are there. We see all the little changes. We, see the differences, especially because if we're there, as their primary care, we're there every day that we're working, we are with them. So we see the changes. And also the parents are there. So we have a relationship with the parents. Parents can share their concerns, and absolutely we were supported and listened to and could advocate for them, and our opinions and skills mattered, and it meant something before. So yeah, I definitely felt supported, and I felt my manager was approachable, able to go to with any concerns that I had, and the doctors were very approachable too. They wanted to know what we thought, and really valued our opinions. yeah, and then it clearly that changed. Yeah, later on, because it depended on what we were wanting to advocate for. For example, when I started to kind of realize the harms of childhood immunizations, I was seeing it firsthand what was happening in the unit. I was watching it. I could see like, okay, this baby was fine, and now they're not, and we're not questioning this. We're not maybe thinking this could be something going on here. I mean, when we give a blood product, we're monitoring them every 15 minutes to see if there's a change. Like any drug that we've given, if we notice something, we report it and let the doctors know, and we do something. But I would watch these. So we'd have 23-week babies in our unit. At 60 days of life, they're given their first childhood immunizations. They're not even full term yet. So that's very different from a full term baby at 2 months of life. And we would see them regress, go back on invasive breathing support, having apneas and bradycardias. So, stop breathing, their heart rate would decrease, and we would just get that passed on shift. Oh, they had their immunizations today, so expect more spells or expect more, support needed, and it's just normal. And so I would question it differently, like, shouldn't we look into this? And I started seeing things, and then that's when the eye rolls, and I'm just crazy nurse, and yeah, things definitely changed. There's certain things that you just were not allowed to question or notice or advocate for, and that was definitely one of them.
And this is prior to what happened starting in March of 2019.
I think this has been going on forever, but I only just started noticing it probably in 2018, when I started to be aware to look for these things. And I was in trouble with my college then in 2018 and 2019 for speaking out about childhood immunizations. Yeah, so I almost lost, I was reprimanded then. At that time, I was scared to lose my license, so I did do what they told me, the reflectionnaire, the questions, reflective questionnaire, sorry, and basically took the slap on the wrist and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't quite say I was wrong, but basically that's what they wanted me to say, and let them know I wouldn't do it again. I'd stay off social media, I'd stay off this, and wouldn't do it again. But I told them if they ever came after the kids or made anything mandatory, then there's nothing that was going to stop me from speaking out. I just didn't expect it to be so soon after."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've got my own issues with that particular subject as well, because of my own child and the research that I've done. And, I left social media altogether a couple of years ago. And the big reason was I would get into arguments with people about two different issues. One that happened in September of 2001, and the other one was what you described with immunization. So, I got frustrated by the lack of actual debate that people were willing to have. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very, very incredibly polarizing subject. It is the one medical procedure in life that nobody is willing to engage in any dialogue about. Mm-hmm. It seems as if though there's this hypnotic reaction to this particular medical subject, and nobody will debate it. And, over the last couple of years, my philosophy has been, I could sit here and say, I told you so, but that's not productive at all. What I tend to say is, hey, you're very late to the party, but let's just celebrate that you showed up at all. And I'm kind of trying to move on in that direction. And, it is very difficult because I came from the Canadian military. It is very difficult sometimes to tell truth to power or to give your opinion. But, you almost get the sense that if I don't do it, I'm technically not doing my job. I'm not living up to my professional responsibility. And, it is very difficult. It's actually, I find, more scary to have moral courage than it is to have physical courage, in terms of, violence or personal physical danger. I find moral courage is absolutely terrifying. but must it must be actioned. For people like you, because I've been following you since long before you ever heard of me, and all the others, all the pioneers that really came before me in terms of this entire movement over the last couple of years. All of these people are full of moral courage, and I think what's valuable about people like you is that you inspire other people to find theirs. And I don't want to say that it's rare, but I'm going to say that it's more rare than I thought it was. And I'm always encouraged when people like you actually step up and say, "Hey, you need to listen to me, because what I'm doing is I'm telling you factual things. I'm telling you the truth. They're not things I'm telling you because I want to tell you them. I'm telling you them because these are factual things that you need to be aware of." And you know that you're sometimes putting your head on the chopping block, but you're willing to still put your head on the chopping block because it is the right thing to do. And if we go back to the Florence Nightingale pledge, that's part of it. So I find it kind of shocking that the universities would, because my understanding is that that oath is taken or given at the graduation for nurses, is that They do the Florence Nightingale pledge. And yet they have a course like they had for you in ethics, and yet they're going to make those graduates give that pledge at the end. So I wonder what they must be thinking as they're regurgitating or reciting that pledge, knowing full well that if they step out of line, they're going to get their heads taken clean off. So
if they even still do the pledge, we learned over the last 3 years that the Hippocratic Oath that the doctors supposedly take, only 40% of them do. It's optional.
Really? It's optional. Well, isn't that interesting?
Yeah, and because you
really
mentioned Bruce Party's name, I believe he even talked about it at the Free Speech and Medicine conference we went to last October. But I had learned about it from another doctor previous to that. That he's like, only, I can't remember what he said, so many in his class, but I think it's only 40% take it now.
Wow. There's a lot of professions out there, like as a Canadian officer, as a soldier, you are classified as a profession. This is why, professional engineers, they wear a steel ring. It's an iron ring on their finger that they wear, and they're supposed to wear it on their writing hand so that when they're doing design work, they look down, they see the ring. It's a reminder of what can happen when things fail. We have all of these reminders, these professional reminders, these oaths, because oaths are often referred to in professions. And I mean, look at the police. They've been, hammered constantly in the last 3 years, people reminding them about their oath. Same with the military. But what is, it doesn't surprise me that, only 40% of doctors would be given an oath, because why would you give somebody something that puts you firmly on a high moral ground, right? You don't want people to have something like that morally to fall back on when you're trying to eliminate moral courage and foster compliance. So I kind of want to move on and ask, when did Canadian frontline nurses officially begin, and what was the motivation for that?
It officially began, I'd say, when we returned home from Washington, D.C., so January 2021. We even put forth our first press release. We were so excited. These, naive nurses going to go change the world. We put this press release together. We had, doctors that had been already speaking out, like Dr. Patrick Phillips, Dr. Malthouse. We had audiologists. We had nurses like sending waves of testimonies that we were reading. And so that was January 28th. We put out this whole huge thing, and we thought, people were going to hear these stories. They're going to hear what, the nurses are seeing in the units, seeing on their floors across Canada. They're going to, listen to these doctors and hopefully, realize what's going on. And obviously was not the case, but, the intention was there. yeah, so Sarah and I, we had both been terminated from our jobs. We're placed under investigation. We know what is happening is wrong. We're seeing firsthand the harms that are happening within our communities, and now we're connected globally and around Canada, and we're seeing it. And like you said, the moral obligation. People were saying, you're so brave for speaking out, and or that must be so hard. The hardest part before for both Sarah and I was when we were staying silent and not doing anything, and watching what was happening, and just not knowing what to do, and it was just killing our souls. Sarah's health was deteriorating. She had been just really thriving with her mental health. She had become sober, lost all this weight, and was facilitating programs at the Gatehouse, and was doing amazing until this happened, and they shut down all her resources, and they shut down her support systems, but left the liquor stores open. And here, recovering alcoholic, it was just, she's like, and closed the gyms. That was her place of, getting strong mentally. And, we just watched, there was just too much harm being done. We just couldn't stay silent. So Canadian Friendly Nurses Forum then kept going. And once DC, happened and we were defamed internationally, the amount of hate that came in was quite significant. But what we weren't ready for was, once that wave kind of dissipated, the amount of support that just kept coming in, encouraging us in the love and lifting us up again. And we're like, oh gosh, like people, want to hear what we have to say. They're just, too scared to do it publicly. And here we are now out there publicly. We've lost, our careers and everything. And it would all be for nothing if we stopped. So we kept going, kept speaking, organizing protests. We organized a huge one at the Canadian, or the College of Nurses Ontario, actually, which was amazing. So we just, we realized we had to keep going. Otherwise it was all for nothing.
At what point then did your official legal problems really begin? Because you've been charged criminally, or you've been fined at least a couple of times from my count. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And obviously I don't want you to talk about anything if your lawyer has said, hey, sort of stay away from certain things that are active, right? But if there's anything you'd like to talk about in terms of, charges, because I know that, from my understanding, there's at least 2 separate incidences, and both involve churches, if I'm not mistaken.
The first legal battle charge that I received was November of 2020. I think it was one of the first charges laid out of going against the Reopening Act of Ontario. I was for a friend of mine. The two of us organized a freedom rally, a protest in London, Ontario. And that was when I first made media headlines, was November of 2020. So that was the first summons that I received. And that trial is still ongoing. It's coming up, I want to say June. It's coming up soon for that one. Since then, for speaking at different protests, I received 11 of those summons throughout the year up to January of 2022. 6 of them have been dropped, but 5 are still ongoing. And one of them is the one that you had mentioned, where I was found guilty and convicted guilty and fined $10,000 plus court costs of $2,500, so $12,500 for attending Easter service mass at the Church of God in Elmer, Ontario on April 25th, 2021. So we did appeal. Well, we are appealing that. And in order for the appeal to be heard, we put in an application for the appeal to be heard without paying the fine. And this was just done recently, a month ago. The Crown prosecutor wanted me to pay $5,000 of the fine for the appeal to be heard. My lawyer suggested $500. The judge came back and said, nope, I want all of it paid. All of it paid, the $12,500, before our appeal date, June 20th. So June 20th is when we're setting the date for the appeal. So it has to be paid in full by June 20th. Mm-hmm.
So they've basically put you into a checkmate situation where in order for you to exercise your right to the legal process, which is an appeal, you are being extorted for $12,500 just to be allowed to advance your appeal in the court system, if I have that correct.
Yes. Yes.
So it's interesting because the purpose of an appeal is to dispute the original decision.
I know.
But what they're actually doing is taking full custody of the punishment. In your case, they're taking the money from you before they'll even grant you your right to the appeal. Wow.
Yeah.
That is particularly disturbing, because if you do go to the appeal and you win the appeal, is there an expectation that you're going to get your money plus interest on that money that you would have otherwise maybe invested? Do you get the money back? Is there been any discussion about that? Because, hey, in Bizarro world, anything's possible.
Yeah. That's supposed to be how it all works, but who knows? Even the fact that the judge went above and beyond what the Crown prosecutor had suggested was quite interesting.
I find that particularly disturbing as well. Is the judge who ruled that you have to pay the money prior to the appeal, is that the same judge that was involved in the original decision?
No.
Okay, so that's interesting to me, because from my point of view, what that judge has just done is financially put you at a severe disadvantage to be able to defend yourself or to action an appeal, because they're now tying up a lot of money that otherwise would go towards your lawyer for the appeal. So there's this now inherent bias of a judge that is making a decision that actively impairs your position to defend yourself in an appeal, which I find particularly disturbing. I'm, full disclosure to everybody, and it shouldn't be a surprise, but I'm absolutely disgusted by the justice, or let's say the punishment system within Canada right now. But we could do a whole podcast on that, and maybe I'll save that for Bruce Party when I get him on the show.
Yeah, no, it needs to be brought up. And sorry, I know I cut you off there. It's just because that's just one aspect of what I'm facing personally myself, and I still have 4 more of those trials to go through, and I don't know what the outcomes are going to be. I think they've labeled me as organizers for all of them, so that's the minimum is $10,000 up to $100,000 in these fines. So I still am facing 4 more of those. But the biggest thing is our Canadian frontline nurses. We found an amazing legal team to support us, to fight for us, and they were willing to go to bat. And we retained them the fall of 2021 after the national hospital protest that Canadian frontline nurses organized all across Canada, which was incredibly successful. That the media, oh my gosh, just adulterated with hate, of course, because it was successful. So we went after the Canadian Nurses Association and a media outlet called Together News for slander and for libel. It should have been an easy, case, because it was pure just defamation. But they pulled out something called the SLAP, SLA 2 Ps, and you probably, maybe Tom can explain this better than what I'm able to right now, but basically we lost our defamation case. So that was supposed to kind of help us move forward. We were supposed to continue, fundraising throughout 2021, but there was so much going on and fires to be put out everywhere that, I think our attentions were just all over the place. So our legal team kept fighting for us. The College of Nurses, for me, Crystal, and Sarah, all our different cases. And Sarah right now, she was under a different avenue than Crystal and I. So they actually went after her for disciplinary, meaning they were permanently going to take her license away. Her trials have started already. It was supposed to be 7 days. They have added on 8 more days. So they're looking at 15 days of trial now with the College of Nurses of Ontario. They're experts with, the experts that Sarah and our team were able to bring on. One of them is Byram Bridle as one of our expert witnesses, and they keep extending it out. This is about free speech. This is about fighting for nurses to continue to advocate. And in the wake of C11 passing, we know how important free speech is. We've seen how they've silenced nurses. We've seen how they have threatened them. And if the public wants nurses to advocate for them, to do what is right, Sarah's case right now is incredibly important. It is for the public and for the nurses to have their voices back. So this case is becoming very expensive on both sides, because the college is, going to charge Sarah for their lawyer costs and court time, and it's now gone 15 days. Expensive on our end. The college is going to end up probably charging Sarah at the end of this an exorbitant amount. And that's just one case that's facing. And right now, that's up to probably about $100,000 from CNO and our lawyers, and it's going to end up being more. And then the other big one that there wasn't enough attention brought up to it, and I don't even know if you followed it or watched, was Canadian Frontline Nurses and Kristen Nagle, that's how it reads, was the first one to go after the Attorney General, the Government of Canada, for wrongfully invoking the Emergency Measures Act. So we just...
Is this done under a judicial review, or is this a separate thing altogether?
Separate. So we just had 3 days in court in Ottawa in person with their legal teams, ours, and several other lawyers for representing different people. One of them was Vincent Gerses and Eddie Cornell. Their lawyer was there. And I'm not sure who the other lawyers were, but it was 3 full days of presenting submissions and evidence to the judge for the Attorney General. So that case is costing significant amount of money. We will hear that decision, I think, in 4 or more months. But our legal team has been amazing that they have not billed us up until this point. They wanted to fight. They know that it is, the right thing to do, but they no longer can keep this up themselves. So we just we did receive our legal bills from them, and we don't know what we're gonna do. So we did put out SOS, and right now it's up to $250,000, and it will probably be more.
Yeah, and I retweeted that the video that Sarah had done for the SAS, or sorry, SOS, not the SAS. And I want to stress this because, like you said, there's a difference between, let's say, the individual charges, for Easter and all that ridiculousness, you going to church. I mean, that is a separate issue on its own, where somebody is being charged criminally and fined a ridiculous amount of money because they went to church. Okay. So I'll let the viewers let that sink in for a second, and then turn over to this other issue. So I think what you're talking about with Eddie Cornell and Vince Gerses is the judicial review for the invocation of the Emergency Act, which I'm a little bit more familiar with. And that was done under Section 62 of the Emergencies Act. There's regulation that defines that you can launch a lawsuit. It's very much like a lawsuit where you're examining or you're going after the Government of Canada's decision to do something, right? It's kind of like a lawsuit, but it's different, is the best way that I can explain it. But, these are the cases that matter to everybody. It's not about the right and wrongness of criminal behavior of somebody who's defending themselves. The judicial review is about where people object to the action of the government, where the official opposition, for example, cannot really do anything against the government. This is the citizens that are stepping up and launching a judicial review. And the outcome of these judicial reviews are going to have an impact on future governments, as well as society today and again into the future. So your judicial review it sounds to me like you're part of that
Yes.
Is about democracy. And I don't throw that word around very loosely, but it's vitally important that that judicial review succeed. And, I hate asking people for money, and I've been trying to raise money for the book that I'm writing as well. For very good reason. I have a team that is helping me do this, but it's the fact that you have to be in a position to tell a story or to defend Canadians in their rights. It takes money. And I commend your law firm and your legal team for stepping up and taking this as far as they possibly can. The JCCF has done something very similar for me because I'm being sued for $400 million, as well as Tamara and Chris and some of the other people, now Harold Jonker. There's a lot of people being sued for $400 million. And, most of us haven't been working in 18 months. I certainly haven't had a job since I was fired from my teaching job. So for me to mount a legal defense, it's not really possible. So in your case, when you're asking for the money, it is in the public interest for the public to try to step up and even help out as much as they possibly can. And so I'm going to stop making my pitch for that. But the fact that you're doing it, that you're putting yourself yet again on the chopping block on behalf of your children, your family, your community, your province, and the country, this takes resources to fight it. I mean, you're not asking for money for your personal energy and your time. You're asking for help from the public. And like Tamara said about the money that was raised for the trucker convoy, that $20+ million was a symbol of the desire of Canadians to fight for their rights. And so by helping you in raising the money that you may raise would also be a symbol to the government that, look, we're going to fight you. You people work for us, but we're going to fight you if you start working or continue to work against us. Mm-hmm. So, this is, it's so difficult to be in this situation. I get it. I'm in a very different situation than you are. I'm only involved right now at the moment in one legal battle, but I do recall last year you did have charges, because I remember doing an affidavit for one of the legal cases that you were involved with your lawyer. And if memory serves, you weren't even notified of your online court date, and I think you lost, but you weren't even there. You weren't even in attendance of it and weren't notified that you were supposed to be there, if I have that correct.
Close. The affidavit that you did was for this the judicial review for the EMA with the Attorney General. So that was part of that case as well. But yes, there was a trial going on that I was not notified about, and that was for going to church. I was very grateful, or however it worked out, that someone, because it's all Zoom court now, someone was on the call that heard my name, and she just so happened to have my number. And she told me that they were giving evidence against me, and the trial against me had started for attending Easter service mass. And I was able to get on the call and be like, excuse me, you're having a trial in my absence. And they had to stop the trial, and they called it a mistrial and rescheduled it. So they did get rescheduled, and that was the one that I did. I was found guilty and fined the $12,000. So that was for the same church incident.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. So they tried to kind of proceed without you actually being there to represent yourself.
Yes.
And now fast forward into the future, they're trying to stop you financially or disadvantage you in terms of appealing the original decision. And again, I want to highlight this. This is for attending church, mm-hmm. right? Church. I actually want to...
I was just going to say, it's important to note too that Trinity Bible Church had brought it, had lost their charter argument, and I do believe they're still appealing it. But when I was found guilty, they brought up Trinity Bible Church as an example to use against me. And they said, that they lost against the charter. And they said, yes, we did infringe upon your rights, but with reasonable cause, we are allowed to do so. And I want to stress that part a lot, because what is reasonable cause? Who determines reasonable cause? Like that is a very, very slippery slope of where anything, the charter can just be obliterated for any reasonable cause. And so that is why Trinity Bible Church lost, why I was convicted guilty, and that just sets precedence for everything moving forward. It's
especially if you're relying on judicial notice.
Yes.
Where you're refusing to look at evidence. So how many of the 11 charges that you faced, how many were for attending a church service?
Just one. The other ones were for speaking at protests outside.
Okay. And so who else was involved, or who else was charged during that specific church service as well?
Vincent Gerses, retired OPP officer, he was charged the $10,000 as well. It was Pastor Hildebrandt's church. I believe his are all lumped up into his big cases. And then there was Derek Sloan and Randy Hillier. And I believe that they were, I think, are still fighting it at a charter level. I'm not sure where. I'm still confused on where they sit with that.
Yeah, that's how they're going to win, right? Is just continue to obliterate us with confusion. And they're very good at it, because I think they're quite confused themselves. So I believe that Derek himself has at least 7 criminal charges that he faced. And I know a separate one, I could be wrong on this detail, but I think Derek might have a charge for attending a separate church service as well. But in the one that Derek was charged with you, I think he was not persecuted, or he did not lose his trial. Or there might be, I mean, there's so many of them, it's hard to keep them all straight,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
But the one that you and Derek were both charged with, I believe Derek was not convicted of the charges for that same exact incident. So there seems to be a double standard there as well.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, because the media mixed that up and confused everyone, thinking that the Hillier, Sloan, and Hildebrandt's charges were dropped. They were dropped for a Norfolk County outdoor protest, not for going to church. And the media mixed those up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so thanks for clearing that up, because it was kind of fuzzy for me as well. But you and Vince Gerses were definitely charged the $10,000 for the Easter Church Assembly.
Yes.
So I know Derek does, last I spoke to Derek, he's got other charges as well. Fast forward, we go to the convoy, and I remember a video that you had done. And from what I remember, you brought your family to the convoy. Your husband was there for a short time, or most of the time your children were there with you. So, that the reason I bring that up is because, if it's such a dangerous Canadian version of January 6th, you certainly wouldn't be bringing your children to something, like that. But I say that in all sarcasm. But you and I met at the convoy. I remember we met in the street. I had texted you that day. You had no idea who I was, which is fair. And I just remember I was like, Kristen Nagle's here in Ottawa. Who's got her phone number? So somebody gave me your number. I texted you. And then I remember the moment we met. It was out front of the Westin Hotel, which is one street north of the Arc where I was working. And we kind of walked by each other, did a double take, and then I introduced myself to you. But what is, my second most important memory of the convoy where you're concerned was the video I saw of you. You had your camera in the face of a police officer. It was nighttime, and you were giving this police officer a fair, but a very difficult time. And I remember distinctly how you were pulling on this police officer's morality and questioning the fact that this individual was just following orders. And, that interview, it was difficult, I know, for you to do. It was difficult for people to watch. But again, when we're standing firmly on moral courage, it's about doing what must be done regardless of personal circumstance. In everything that you said to that police officer was from the heart. It was very truthful. And that's where we're taking people to the point of, we have two paths we can go. We can go the violent, angry, non-forgiving path. We can go down that road. That's easy. And even James Topp said when he got to Ottawa, it's more difficult to choose peace than it is to choose violence. But we could have gone the way you did in that video and try to appeal to the humanity of people that are knowingly or unknowingly oppressing us, okay, in this particular police officer. But if you could, I'd like you to describe the scenario, what set up that evening, what made you do that video and talk to that police officer the way you did that night.
Mm-hmm. As you were describing that, I was trying to think of when exactly that was, to be honest. At first I thought you were talking about the one where I stood in front of his face and he wanted me to move.
You're pushing us against concrete. Well, then you guys stop pushing us against the concrete. Do not kick. Oh, how am I supposed to do? Oh, but this guy grabbing me. Look at this officer. You're pushing us against concrete. I can't breathe. They're going to march them down this way. Okay, guys, I'm down. Stop. Get up here. Get me up.
Okay. I spent 2 full days on the front lines of, the Friday and Saturday, when the police brutally and, violently came to remove peaceful protesters. I spoke to a lot of officers. I filmed a lot of officers. I was there from the start till it was nighttime. And it was just all very emotional. Different emotions the first day compared to the next day. The first day, my innocence, the naive kind of, idealistic thinking of what Canada was completely shattered. Even though I knew it was kind of going in that direction, I was still in a place of denial that this wasn't going to happen in Canada. So the first day, I was heartbroken. So that was probably what you had watched. I was heartbroken for everyone in Ottawa, for all the truckers, for all the families, for my kids and everyone's kids, for the future. I was devastated, and I wanted them to know that they broke Canadians' hearts, and they didn't have to. And that's probably where that came from, because thinking about it's going to make me cry again.
Well, you know what? You've described it perfectly, because on the 19th, when I did a live stream and I announced that we would peacefully withdraw from the city of Ottawa, or that we would recommend to the truckers to make their own decision to do so. It was a very difficult day for me. It was a very emotional time. And I think that it's will go down in, my memory as one of the worst days of my life. And I felt heartbroken. I felt heartbroken for this country. And I think you describe it perfectly. Your emotion was caught on a live stream or on your phone on a video, and a lot of people saw it. But I think you've described it perfectly. It was pure heartbreak. And you get the rare opportunity to address the person who's contributing to that nationwide heartbreak. But I'd like you to continue, because I kind of cut you off on there, but you kind of hit a note with me as well.
No, that's okay. Yeah. So that was the first day was the heartbreak. And then the pure shock and, you know, going back to the hotel room where my husband and kids were, they came down that weekend, and never left the hotel room for 2 days, obviously. And my poor husband in there in the hotel room, you know, watching our boys, well, just glued to the phone, just making sure I was okay. I was like, I can't imagine what that would have felt like in those times for him. He's pretty strong character. The next day was anger. I went from the heartbreak, you know, the bubble had been burst, the innocence, you know, the naive, like this is happening in Canada, that shell shock. The next day was anger. Cause I was like, you came back for a second day. I talked to the first morning on the Friday, I talked to an officer and he said, this is not about you guys. I don't want to be here. This is about moving trucks. It's about moving trucks. You know, once the trucks are gone, you guys can go back to doing what you're doing, which is protesting. You have that right to do it. And he spoke.
I wish they would have told all of us.
Yeah, he spoke so kindly and genuine. I have it all on live stream.
The world's watching your eyes.
I love you, man.
And we do love you because we are here for you too and your family and your kids' future and their grandkids.
Don't worry, you know that's not easy.
And I know it's not easy. I lost my job for speaking up too. My husband's a teacher, he lost his job. We were both unemployed. We sold our house. We had to make a lot of life changes because we knew what side we wanted to stand on. We gave up everything to be on this side. Everyone has a choice. Following orders and following policies is not. It doesn't have to be the reason. It didn't get anyone anywhere. You know. I know you know. And I know you know too, because I've seen it in your eyes as well. I know he knows. I know he knows. You guys know. I know York Police, this is not what you came here for.
Just say you don't want to do this. Just say you don't want to stand against us. Just say no.
You have to go home and look at yourself in the mirror after this. And you have to hold your kids. And you have to kiss them to bed after this.
My 12-year-old daughter is watching this live right now. This is her future.
You know, my 6-year-old and 3-year-old are in the hotel room right now watching this. I told them it wasn't a good day for them to come outside. They're coming.
And it was all a lie because he confused us at that time. And this is going back to the very first morning on the Friday. And we started to step back and retreat because we were so confused. We didn't know what to do. We were outnumbered. And I remember we stepped back and there was this yellow truck. This was right at like Rideau by the mall. We stepped back and there was this yellow truck ahead of us. And we stepped behind the yellow truck and he looked at us and he said, "Don't leave me." And I have all of this on live. And as soon as we stepped back and he said this, they smashed his window and pulled him out. And I thought, oh my gosh, like these truckers have stood here, like stood their ground day in and day out for 3 weeks and you know, standing firm for Canadians. And we just retreated and left him. And like, I was a mess. I was devastated that we did that to him and all the truckers. And that set the tone again. That was the Friday heartbreak. So once I kind of went back to the hotel room that night, cold, you know, hadn't eaten anything, just shocked. The next day was anger because then the police were back a second day for more, you know, by choice. You know, they didn't have to be there. You know, they tell themselves like, I have no choice, like orders. No, everyone has a choice. And that was one video I told the police officer that, no, I had a choice too, that I lost my job over this. My husband is now unemployed as well. Because Chris was on unpaid leave for a year because he took a stance. So it's like, we're both unemployed. You have a choice and you are choosing to be here. So day 2, the Saturday, I moved into anger that this was the choice they were making to be there and do that to us.
Yeah, I do remember I was there when Candace and the other man was run over by the horse.
Yes.
I was only about 15 feet away. Yes. I did go through a range of emotions during that time. I think I went through the full spectrum of emotions. And at some point, I decided that the best thing for me to do would be to vacate that spot, because I knew that at some point my negative emotions were going to get the better of me. And I thought the best thing to do was evacuate the area myself, cool off, and then mentally regroup, because I was angry. And I think that, that translated through in my actions in the next day, my conversations with the police, as well as, when I did do the live stream. Those 2 days were incredibly difficult. But the one thing I want to highlight is, you're not in a fair fight with law enforcement, right? We're not there with guns. We're not there with body armor and helmets and protective equipment against people that are demonstrating. We don't practice as demonstrators to confront police officers with that type of ammunition and that type of weaponry. I mean, there was reports of sound cannons being there, which are devastating to people. They had lots of weapons. So to beat ourselves up and to say, we should have stood our ground, stayed there and fight, you're going to get steamrolled. Mm-hmm. And that's just the fact of the matter. So, yes, it is traumatic to feel or to live with the belief that maybe you left somebody behind, but the reality is you're powerless. And that's why it hurts so much, is because we were all powerless to stand our ground, and they knew that, right? But
yeah, and it was especially at that moment. Oh, sorry. It just, because talking about the helplessness and not knowing anything, and we didn't realize how many lines were trying to be held. Like, we were at this one at, the end of Rideau Street. And, then we started to retreat back, and then that's, we were so upset about, the one trucker. But then when we stepped back and we looked around, we realized we were surrounded. And at that moment, we didn't realize how much. And then I remember thinking, people are like, hold the line. And I was like, there's no line to be held. What we're doing is delaying. We're delaying it. And, showing principle and courage and heart. But once I saw that we stepped back from there, I was like, oh my gosh, there's like a whole section here, a whole section here. They got like the tanks, the military apparel is what it looked like. The Quebec riot gear, people in their green suits. And I just remember thinking, like, we're surrounded. Like, we are not doing this.
Yeah. And I mean, these police officers, they're part of a unit. It's a specialized unit that comes together and does their public order units, right? To deal with these types of situations. I mean, unless you're a professional protester, this is not something that you would encounter in your ordinary day. So, the full overwhelming advantage goes to law enforcement in that particular case. Mm-hmm. What's troubling is, all the steps that led up to that. And, I participated in the entire 7.5 weeks of the Public Order Emergency Commission. I listened to the testimony. I could go on for hours and hours and hours why those final 2 days didn't need to happen. And to this day, I don't believe they were legal. But, you raised another point that we kind of jumped over. You use the term as being labeled as an organizer in other protests and stuff like that. And it's funny because in, the charter, section 2 of the charter, when you're talking about your right to assemble, there's no mention of somebody who organizes the assembly. So since when does it become a crime to organize people that are assembling? Are we to assume that organically people are just going to have the same exact thought and they're going to show up on the same day at the same time? Somebody does have to organize that. So, to target individuals for organizing and facilitating other people's right to assemble, I find that a very craven, disgusting point of view on the side of, the courts. Or people laying charges. And we're still seeing right now a friend of mine from the Convoy that I met. He's from Niagara. He's a Christian man, a father of 13. He's on his municipal council. Harold Jonker is now, as of Wednesday last week, a week ago, was charged with 4 different counts, 15 months after the Convoy. So it begs the question, when are they coming to my door? When are they coming for Danny? When are they coming for other people? 15 months later, we're still having to look over our shoulder because we exercised our charter rights to assemble. And I kind of want to highlight that with the comparison between what the PSAC union leadership is doing and what they have done over the last couple of weeks versus what we had done. But I'm going to just kind of jump over that whole thing. And let's just say that I think the hypocrisies on both the union, who did not support the Convoy, as well as the government of Canada, I think their hypocrisies are well established and highlighted just all on their own. Their behavior, their horrific behavior sells itself. It's not about the file of the union, but it's the leadership in the government. But I kind of want to move on because you've been extremely generous with your time. So I before we finish up, I'm going to kind of put this idea out there for you, and I'm going to play the imagination game here and say that Canadian frontline nurses are now in charge of organizing nurse training, the profession of nursing, and getting nursing back on track with where you believe it should have never strayed from. So in this hypothetical scenario, my guess is that you would want to start with maybe replacing the College of Nurses in Ontario, just for starters, and maybe your nursing union. But this is fantasy land in my scenario that I'm trying to paint. But Canadian frontline nurses are now in charge of the direction of nursing in Canada. What does that look like for you?
Definitely getting rid of the regulatory bodies and the unions. It'd be more of a sovereign care of what we've been trying to do the past year as well with our national directory database. We have been trying to train nurses and get them to challenge their way of thinking and their programming and indoctrination, see things differently. It would be.
Have they been receptive? Have nurses been receptive to that? Have you had a lot of people jumping in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're just hoping to grow. We're hoping to work with other organizations that are trying to do the same, like Canada Health Alliance. So this fantasy world is actually like in the works, and we are trying to create it. Is helping the individual though become their own expert, because no one can heal, treat, or cure except for the individual themselves. We're just there as guides to help them along their journey, to show them different techniques, find out what works for them. But ultimately, it falls on the individual. And I'm not talking about acute illnesses or emergency care here. I'm talking about kind of more of the lifestyle, the chronic illnesses and diseases and things that the individual can research and learn. We over the last decades, 100 years or more, we have been programmed to just hand over responsibility of ourselves. If something is wrong, instead of before we used to have healers, we used to have the foragers, we used to have people to help, and we used to know our bodies. We used to be connected to our bodies and know what was wrong and what we needed. The women in the house knew what herbs or things to pull out to help. And this was all passed down, and through society and the culture we live in now, it's all been handed over. It's like, okay, I want that quick fix. Tell me what's wrong and give me the pill to pop. So that's the culture that we need to move away from, and we need to really help individuals to feel empowered to take back their own responsibility. And we're doing this, getting to the root cause of the problem. A more natural, holistic approach, and seeing the individual as a whole. They're not just an arm, or it's not just teeth. It is a whole body that is all connected with a spirit and with a soul and with energy, and that's something you're never going to find on a petri dish. So we are working towards this. And my goal, my personal goal, after, I think I was placed in all these areas of work for a reason, especially ending with babies. And Tom, I know you had mentioned something early on in the podcast, about just having grace with people. The title of your podcast is Meeting Him in the Middle. And I think about my own self. I believed in childhood immunizations. My best friend now, I thought I couldn't be friends with her because I was like, oh, like she's one of those like anti-vaxxers. Like I can't. And she's like, my best friend. And when it comes to birth, I witnessed, the baby's labor and delivery. And I just thought that's what, birth was. I was so extreme on the one side. I actually thought like home birth should be illegal. Like I thought it was dangerous and needed, the security and protection of the hospital. And since then, oddly, has been an out of system birth home. No midwives. I had a traditional birth companion, completely out of the system, and it was absolutely beautiful. The hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but beautiful. And for me, I want to help women get back to their own power and their strength. And I believe it starts with birth, with taking back that power, with bringing it back in our home. Because when you're confident in your body and in that birthing process, you become a confident mother, and then you can confidently raise your children without handing them over to the system as well. Because you don't need to go to these well baby visits. You don't need to hand over responsibility because you are confident that our bodies do exactly what they need to do, and you're more confident in making better decisions for your children. And, it all starts at the very beginning. And if we can raise healthy children, then we raise, healthy, strong leaders, and that's the next generation. So for me personally, it starts with getting back in the home on all accounts from birth. And then with Canadian frontline nurses, we always say from birth till death, getting care back in the homes again. Mm-hmm.
If you had an opportunity to get involved in the education system that the nurses coming through now are going through, what are the biggest changes that you would want to make to the nursing training or education system at the universities, colleges, or even, for brand new nurses coming into the system? What kind of changes would you make there?
All of it. I would be like, jump ship and come over to what we're creating in our education. Honestly, I went back to school to become a holistic nutrition. I did it part-time over 2 years. It's a 1-year course. And I'd have to say that intense training, like you looked at biology, chemistry, like you looked at the body, you looked at the whole picture. That training was more beneficial than my 4 years of nursing. And wow. I would want to add in, to the whole program, the nutrition, but real nutrition, not the Canadian food guide, BS, real nutrition, the importance of having, a spiritual faith, whatever that might look like, for the individual, talking about nature and, and just food. Like that's like food is huge, and the stress, right? Like finding ways for your mental health. But honestly, my 1 year in the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition was far superior of what I learned for actual health and taking care of people than my 4 years of nursing.
Would you perhaps, like, this is where I would approach it from my perspective, and full disclosure, I've never in my life had any desire whatsoever to be part of the medical system ever. It's not a job that I could do. But what would you say in terms of the indoctrination at the university or at the college level? Like, you mentioned the fact that they're doing ethics courses and they're bringing up your specific case, which I particularly find repulsive that they would do that in this day and age to somebody. But do you have a comment or a thought on that level of indoctrination that nurses are coming in? Like we talked about it a little bit in terms of fear, but what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, no, it's real. I was one of them. Like I was an indoctrinated nurse. You go in there, bushy-eyed, excited, want to learn and help people and change the world, and they get you. You know, it's like, here are your pharmaceutical books, not, you know, called that, but it's like, here you go. This is the truth. Don't pay attention to anything on the other side. That's all wrong. She's grabbing my headset. Sorry. She's been good, but time's up. But, it got me. It got me. And it's because they really hammer in that is wrong. That is not science. This is right. You know, they have all the bells and whistles and they make it all look so shiny. And, you know, we're making a difference. We care. We want to help people. And this is, you know, how we do that and make a difference. And don't pay attention over there because that is wrong. It's quackery. It's anti-science and it harms people. It's dangerous. And it's so amazing when you step back and you finally exit that world because you're just like, oh my gosh, it's complete nonsense. Like, you know, let's poison babies and children with all these immunizations. But when you go to your doctor, but try only one food at a time because you don't know what they could be allergic to. Don't mix foods when you're introducing foods, but, you know, put all this poison in them. And it's like, put some lavender on that. Oh, but is that harmful? I need to research lavender. Oh, one nurse that I worked with, an actual true story. I learned how catnip is in the mint family. It is so amazing for calming the nerves and helping with fevers. It's a diaphoretic. It helps sweat, like break the fever. And I was talking how this is very benign and helpful for children. And she just lambasted me, that she's like, that is not wrong, that's wrong, that's harmful. And just went off, and it's amazing. But then, you know, the next day at work, I heard her telling another nurse that she should put her teenage child on Accutane, which is a really potent, harmful drug. Like, you have to sign a waiver that you're not going to be trying to conceive. You can't go out in the sun. You can't do anything. Like, it is a strong, potent drug. But like, that's okay. But me talking about, you know, catnip tea for a child, like, that's dangerous. So like, that's the level of indoctrination, like right there. That was kind of a prime example for me, like living that one.
Yeah, that's I think that's all too common, and it's actually quite frightening. But you know, before we go, where can we find you? Where can people go and help you? I think it's CanadianFrontlineNurses.ca is your website, and we will post the description for you. I know there is a donate button on your website. And if there's any nurses that are watching this and you haven't joined Canadian Frontline Nurses, or at least been to the website, I encourage you to do so. But I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. And the baby is amazing and has also been very patient. So I think we're gonna end off there because I'm detecting a little bit of fussing.
Yes,
and
but a good napping through
again,
that.
Yeah, exactly. But then again, I thank you so much for coming on the show. And just so everybody knows, you're actually my very first guest to this new podcast.
I'm honored.
I'm very, very excited about that because you've been a hero of mine long before the Convoy. And so I really appreciate you and your baby taking the time to do this show.
Well, thank you very much for having us. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.